There is no bigger moment in darts than the split in 1993.
If Fallon took darts to this point, Luke took it up here.
The winner of the women's event barely covers their costs.
Welcome back to the MODUS Super Series, where today we are looking at some of the most influential moments in darts history over the years. Makes me think 1978 was the first year of the Embassy World Championship when Leighton Rees of Wales picked up the title, beating John Lowe in the final. Fast forward to 2024, there's been plenty of big moments that have happened ever since. Matthew Edgar is alongside me to talk all about them. And it's amazing to think, actually, when you look at it, darts, the first World Championship was only in 1978. When you consider the history of other sports like tennis and golf, which has gone on for hundreds of years, there's been lots of key moments in such a short space of time.
And we continue to write even more. When we look at darts as a sport, it is completely in its infancy in terms of it as a global sport and a worldwide sport. Yes, we're now starting to get further developments over in Asia and in America with systems like the CDC, but they're still very much in their infancy, which makes you wonder where this sport's going to go in times. You mentioned that first World Championship. Before then, we had the News of the World, a best-of-3 tournament playing all around the UK, ending ironically at the Alexandra Palace. So I think there's more stories ahead of us than maybe there is behind.
Your granddad played at the News of the World, didn't he, back in the day? That was how the sports kind of evolved from it being a real pub game where your one tournament was playing in your local, then qualified through to a national finals, to a sport that's being watched in hundreds of territories across the world.
And that could be one of the first real influential moments in regards to what the PDC have done in professionalising the game, because certainly in the early days, it was a pub sport, and then you qualified through your pubs to play for your county, which was basically in a club, but it was the same sort of thing, just with a stage. Then fast forward a few years and we look at things like the BDO and the early days of the PDC. These early days of the PDC, I remember playing in these events when I was like 14, 15 years old, and there was on caravan parks in March, in November. It was freezing cold. But when the caravan parks were shutting down throughout the season, the tournaments would roll in and we'd play ranking events. And they were just open events. You didn't need a tour card. You didn't need any of this sort of systems that we have now, where now the game is very professionalised, and that's where it's going to go global. The sort of Pro Tour playing behind closed doors in sports centres and sports halls now, with professional bodies and organisations looking into things like nutrition and all the days of cold caravan parks are gone.
They most certainly were, but that was kind of the heritage of the sport to begin with. They had the first World Championship in 1978, the BDO, and then there was a real boom, wasn't there? In the 1980s, there was only 3 major television networks in the UK at the time, but they all wanted a slice of the darts, didn't they?
I think with this, you have to look down to reasons. There's always something that draws people in, and it's normally an individual or a collective of individuals. And if we look sort of in the 80s, we've got John Lowe, Jockey Wilson, Eric Bristow, players like that now start to come to the forefront that actually put eyes on the product because people wanted to see these guys go at it. Certainly Eric Bristow, he was a different person above his age, and still now a household name. You mentioned the name Eric Bristow and people know exactly who it is and exactly what he's done.
The sport had that massive boom in the 1980s. It then had a crash towards the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, which is where the split comes in 1993. The Embassy World Championship played at the Lakeside, where you had players that were forming a split. They already had the Lada UK Masters tournament on Anglian television in 1992. Players went to the World Championship, and you could just tell that there was a revolt on their hands.
There is no bigger moment in darts than the split in 1993. That is the biggest moment. It was such a risk, such a gamble for all the players who were at the top of the rankings to step away and go, we're going to go on our own. We're going to break away from this organisation that sort of set the table, because they didn't like the way it was being treated. They didn't like the way the prize money was divvied out. They didn't like the fact that there was so much going in and not a lot coming out. And that system continued to be that way for a very long time after that as well. And they took a massive risk. They was outlawed. They was banned from playing in the BDO then, so they weren't going to tournaments. They weren't able to generate that income. The only things they had at the time was trust that they could do better, and potentially exhibitions. But even then, it became harder with the exhibition bookings because certain people wouldn't want to sort of get involved in the divide and book these players. So they put their careers on the line to form what we've got now.
People would say it was live-like, but actually it's completely different in the aspect of, yes, they created a split, they created a breakaway, but as you mentioned, there's no guarantee that this was going to work. And we actually saw Mike Gregory move back to the BDO before the first World Championship at the Circus Tavern. But what was so key about that split was the fact that every prior world champion had signed up to this new organisation.
Let's not also forget the fact, we say the date, 1993, and what you do is you sort of try and project back and you try and remember what life was like back then. But let's actually remember what life was like back then. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't streaming platforms like YouTube and all these opportunities that you can put yourself out there. You relied on broadcasters to put you in front of eyes. You relied on newspapers to put you in front of eyes. You couldn't do it yourself. Like nowadays, you can get yourself in the public eye. You can use social media and the platforms and the streaming platforms that are available for live darts or for darts content. None of that existed then. You didn't have a mobile phone. If you was out and about, you had to use a phone box. You put 10p in, do it before the pips go. That was life back then. So if that happened now, you would probably say it'd be less risky than then. And when you think about the risk that they've taken, that could have gone so wrong, but how right it has gone.
I mean, particularly that first World Championship, because I suppose there would have been many that were hoping and expecting that almost this revolt-like tournament fails.
Absolutely. And do you know what? When they started moving forward with things, and like the inception of the World Match Play as well at Blackpool, which I thought was a genius move, by the way, looking at a big holiday location like that and putting an event on. But I used to go to the World Match Play. I used to love going, and we started going in 1997. Rod Harrington picking up the title, back-to-back years. And we used to pay £35, and that was for a season ticket. And a season ticket meant you was there all week. The first day on the Sunday wasn't even televised. You'd go in and the first day was just sort of behind closed doors, and then they updated you on the TV the next day what happened on day one. And the prize money was low, and genuinely, they used to have people outside the Winter Gardens going round trying to get people to come into the building. Do you want to come into the darts tonight? Come into the darts tonight. And they was just trying to drag a crowd in just so it looked good on TV. And nowadays, it's selling out in the pre-sale and you can't get a ticket. And it just, when you think about that, it doesn't seem that long. We're talking 25 years or so.
And then Barry Hearn gets involved in the sport. We saw what it was like before. The PDC was growing. At the time, it was just about outdoing the BDO for prize money. I think it was about 1998 where the PDC prize money was more than the BDO prize money for their particular World Championship. They had some good acorns and good foundations to build on. But when Barry Hearn came in the building, it went up another level. I think that's fair to say.
When you talk about someone who's willing to take a risk, there's your guy. And he foreseed something in darts, certainly in the atmosphere of it. And his goal was to sell the atmosphere. And as a player, I've sat in Barry Hearn meetings. I think I've done about 10 Barry Hearn speeches so far. They're inspiring, I can tell you that. You come out of there feeling wonderful. But in there as well, he really does highlight the importance of showing your emotions and showing what it means to you so that the viewer at home can relate to that. And that was the atmosphere he wanted to create. And when the Premier League first started, massive thing in darts, which brings in a lot of income that pays for the majority of the Pro Tour. Now, when that first came in, it was almost like, this is crazy. Like, how are you going to pull off like a tour of the same players for this many weeks? And again, when you look at what happens now in regards to the ticket sales for the Premier League, and that's in arenas, proper sports arena. We're not talking no longer the bingo hall or a nightclub somewhere that's been kitted out for a tournament for a week. These are serious arenas that are hosted by the biggest performing artists.
And that Premier League was probably the next moment which really took the PDC to that next level. The majors were established, the Grand Prix, the Match Play, the Worlds. The Las Vegas Desert Classic, of course, was involved back then. But when the Premier League came in, it was almost as if, right, this is the eureka moment where darts gets to that next level.
And where is it going to go now? Now, that's the exciting thing, because we talk about the infancy of darts and where it is in regards to its performance so far. But you mentioned Las Vegas Desert Classic, an event we lost, but it's kind of now been replaced with an event at Madison Square Garden. And you just look at that development and that step forward and you think, well, where's it going to go in the future? Certainly with more players now being unearthed worldwide, with the PDC Pro Tour now. I think the last I heard it was something like 52% British now, where it used to be significantly higher. So we're nearly at that 50-50 split with Britain and the rest of the world, to the point where the rest of the world's going to take us over very soon.
And then a few years later, I think there was an establishment in terms of the top level of the game, and the top players were being looked after really well. And I suppose the next step naturally for any sport that's looking to grow is to look after its grassroots level, look after the next level down, to feed those players further up the system. Then in 2009, Barry Hearn does something which could have, and probably in hindsight, did change the sport forever. And that was put in a bid to buy the BDO.
£1 million, which Barry Hearn's been on record since to say would have been the biggest waste of money he ever had. He wanted to buy that. He wanted to buy the county system, which, by the way, at the time, I looked at and thought, this is a great idea. Like, if Barry Hearn buys the county system, lower down the amount of numbers, we could have weekly televised darts here. At the moment, the county system plays with 12 players in the A and 12 players in the B team, 24 players. Lower that down, whack it on TV. This would be fantastic. Or certainly now streaming platforms. But when that was rejected and the BDO was said it's not up for sale, that was the moment the BDO died. Because when you look at what happened off the back of it, Barry Hearn went, okay, well, we've got the professional game sewed down. How do I get that feeder system? And then Development Tour, Challenge Tour was invented. Then the Players' Championship Finals moves from 32 to 64. Then you've got a World Cup of Darts. So now we're going to use our broadcasting contracts and our connections to put this on, to try and get people to come to our World Cup so we can showcase talents from around the world. And they made changes instantly off the back of that pretty much made people go, well, actually, I can play under professional conditions with a pathway. That's all players want, a pathway. And I've got a pathway now to the World Championship. I've got a pathway to my tour card. And the second that happened, that's when the jumps came from the BDO. Everyone abandoned ship.
And then the pathways really did come into place. It took a few years for the Challenge Tour, the Development Tour to really spring into life. And then once it did, we were seeing players, when we left, right and centre, really beginning to make their names within the game.
Yeah, I think the big thing we've got at the moment is the exposure of the game. We now have Darts Connect, we've got streaming systems. You get to see the players on a regular basis. And I think that's the difference now. We're seeing a lot of upsets in darts, a lot of the big names losing. It's because of these pathways and because of the opportunity, the exposure. Beforehand, to get that sort of exposure, to get that chance on a big stage or onto a streaming, it always felt like that was a factor that made the more experienced player win, because it was another additional thing. Well, now it's not. We have Darts Connect all the way through the system now onto the Challenge Tour. I'd like to see streaming go onto the Challenge Tour as well at some point. But when we look at the exposure of the players and the opportunities that they've got and the pathways that have been developed, and only going to be developed even further now as well throughout the PDC and through all the different systems they've got.
And then as a consequence, the World Championship expands. It moves up to 96 in the 2019 edition. That included 2 female players in there, which at the time was deemed a move which I suppose we haven't seen before. It's kind of the first sport that kind of introduced that type of move, shall I say. And then the second year in, something happens. First of all, Makura Suzuki misses darts to beat James Richardson. A couple of days later, Fallon Sherrock takes on Ted Evitts. And from that night onwards, it almost felt like the sport as a whole changed forever.
In terms of media coverage, it certainly did. In terms of opportunities for female players, it did. Now, it wasn't a popular decision. I can tell you from the players' side, because someone who was in and around the players and around the Pro Tour at the time, it wasn't a popular decision. It wasn't a popular decision on social media. It was a one-day qualifier originally, and it stayed that way the year that Fallon got in. However, off the back of that, we then seen the development of the women's series, which, when we're talking about the development of the women's game, massive, because you know, at the women's series, you're pitching the best ladies players against each other, and they're all going to go there. Of course they are, because there's prize money that was worth winning. I've been out and about on some of these open tours this year, and some of the times the winner of the women's event barely covers their costs. It could cost them more to win the tournament, but they do it to get the ranking points. Now with the PDC and the women's series, the opportunity is there to win serious money and to actually, when you look at the players at the top of it, make a viable career. Not only that, you've now got exposure, you've now got opportunity, you've got the women's match play that's developed off the back of it, opportunity to get in the Grand Slam, opportunity to get in the World Championship. There's a genuine pathway there, not to make lots of professional female players, but certainly to make a handful.
What did that do then long term? Because you see the women's series probably launched on the back of what Fallon did, and then Fallon playing on the World Series circuit. I mean, when she won her games, Billie Jean King, one of the most famous tennis players of all time, a trailblazer in her own right, was tweeting about what she did. There was eyes on the sport that no one could have ever envisaged a few years earlier.
Most people in the world of darts, we compete or we analyse on one line of context. Who is the best? Who will win? And who's the world number one? Who will win the trophy? Who's going to be the world champion? That is the only sort of things within the context that we only tend to talk about, because we don't have those sort of personalities within the sport where you go, right, I want to watch for them. I don't think I'd be wrong in saying that barely anyone, if anyone, buys a ticket to go to the darts to see a person. They go to watch the sport. So when you've got a different way of pronouncing a game, when you've got something that's interesting, Fallon Sherrick, during that period of time, wasn't a novelty act. Fallon Sherrick was pushing for those World Series titles. Instantly, my mind goes to the Grand Slam of Darts quarter-final with Peter Wright, an iconic game. Not because it was a novelty act, but because Fallon was playing so well, and she was able to mix it up with the top players for that period of time. And that gives you new context, that gives you new stories, gives you new opportunities, puts new eyes on the sport, because we all have a story. We all want to watch a story. We all want to watch something new. And for that period of time, Fallon Sherrick was sure that.
We had an iconic moment here, didn't we, when Fallon hit a 9?
Most viewed clip we've ever had at the Super Series as well, a clip that went worldwide. And for that reason, because when you can mix the two, when you've got a story, you've got something there that's promotable, something that people want to see. When you've got quality and class, you've got something that's promotable, something people want to see. Everyone wants to see a 9 darter. It's the pinnacle of our sport. But when you can combine the two, and you've got a story such as Fallon Sherrick, the first female player to hit a 9 darter on TV, you are combining quality with a promotable story. I'm not surprised. I'll be very surprised if we ever get anything as big as that or a clip bigger than that here at the Super Series. And I think that video will be viewed every single day while ever it's on YouTube.
Fallon had 3 years very much in the spotlight. Then we saw Beau Greaves come onto the scene. And I think there was possibly within the sport maybe a market as to who the next big player is going to be. Michael van Gerwen maybe not being at the peak of his powers. There was a power struggle for world number one between Gerwyn Price and Peter Wright for a number of years. Luke Cumberland began to dominate. And then at last year's World Championship, a 16-year-old kid comes to the fore. If Fallon took darts to this point, Luke took it up here.
I think he could stand up and take it a bit higher. The reason it's so good is because he ticked every box. When we want to look at those stories, the context, Fallon Sherrick was an interesting context because it was a female player doing things that female players haven't done before, but it had a ceiling. It had a limit as far as it would go. Fallon was never going to be world number one. Luke Littler could. And he's got that extra context. He's that surprise factor. He qualified for the UK Open when he just turned old enough to be able to qualify for the UK Open. Went to the UK Open, did well. Did good things here at the Super Series. Went to the World Championship and lit the world alight at 16 years old. Won the Premier League at 17. He ticks both because he's the novelty in the fact that he's that young player. We've never seen this before from a player so young doing so well. But he also ticks the box that he's so competitive and he could be the world number one. Now, when we look at how he does it as well, he appeals to that generation. He sits and plays computer games. He eats sweets. He likes a kebab. He is literally the working man's hero, isn't he?
What next? What do you think's next for the sport? What do you think the next? What could be a moment that we haven't seen before that realistically could happen?
One of two things for me. There are two major continents at the moment which have high participation numbers but don't quite have the quality to breach the professional game. Now, they have breached professional games so far in the fact they'll come over and win a game, or a player will come over, but we've not had that deep run yet. Now, one thing we can know from the viewing figures, when Michael van Gerwen or a Dutchman hit the World Championship final, the viewing numbers double. Not only that, when we look at German TV viewing numbers, they eclipse that of the Dutch viewing channels. However, we've never had a German World Championship finalist, but yet they're still pulling millions of views, more than we get in the UK and more than they get in Holland. Now imagine what that would be like if we had a player from America, a player from Asia, who came over with a genuine chance of competing and challenging for the world title. Imagine a player from Asia being in the World Championship final against Luke Humphries or against Luke Littler. The numbers, the eyes, the exposure, the growth, everything that is possible. When you put the UK and you see what's been achieved in our tiny little country, and you put that into America or into Asia, that is what excites me.
Matt, thank you. Always great to delve through the archive, isn't it? Thank you for your company as well. We'll join you again soon for more of the best here at the Super Series.
I feel a lot less nervous than last time.
Can you remember what I said, Mason?
You said stop moving your body.
No, I said stop missing.
Sometimes I feel like I get more lucky if I wear my lucky trousers. Oh, I would love to play the World Cup.
Dab in there, that's it. World Cup.
I think we would pairs partners in the World Cup one day.
Another one.
No, you're going to go for the 141.
Oh, really?
I'll go for the 180.
Team 9 data.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. Sometimes I feel like I get more lucky if I wear my lucky trousers.
Yeah, I was gaining like 10,000 subs a month in lockdown.
I got picked on for being different, but when I played darts, I was allowed to be me.
Like, oh, you're running around like a madman, and blah, like, yeah, never seen you so happy. I was like, what?
I did actually give him a little bit of advice. Can you remember what I said, Mason?
You said stop moving your body.
No, I said stop missing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to actually. I'll put it there later. I'll end up pulling it off the wall. I told you.